Okay. Hi, I'm going to go ahead and start. My name is Macion, and I am a student at Cotty College in Nevada, Missouri. For this class, I decided that I would cover the topic of how the press covers sex crimes and victims of sex crimes. Before I move forward, I would like to add that I had previously recorded this, but it did not record the audio. So if you have any difficulties with this, please email me, and I will try and fix it. I'm not that tech savvy, though. So, okay, we'll go ahead and begin. So for my introduction, I decided to highlight just a few key points. Sex crimes are often underreported, misrepresented, or misunderstood. The media plays a critical role in shaping how we talk about these crimes, encouraging more responsible, empathetic coverage and greater public awareness, and an emphasis on support for victims and accurate storytelling. These are just kind of a key outline of what we're going to be discussing in this presentation. So I chose to research how the press covers sex crimes because it's a topic that I feel is often too stigmatized. Even though these crimes are extremely serious, they're sometimes treated as tabloid material or mishandled by the press. They try and influence the public. This can cause harm not just to the victims in question, but also to others who have experienced similar trauma. By bringing this topic forward, I hope to promote better understanding of how media coverage affects survivors, how biases creep into reporting, and how we as consumers can encourage more responsible journalism. Talking about these crimes with sensitivity and accuracy is essential to both justice and healing. Moving forwards, we're going to be talking about the media's influence. So the press holds enormous influence over how society views sex crimes. News reports, documentaries, podcasts, even headlines can affect how the public perceives not only the event, but the people involved. When the media leans into sensationalism or uses biased language, it often results in victim blaming or undermines the credibility of survivors. On the other hand, responsible journalism has the power to educate, create empathy, and push for justice systems reforms. That's why it's so critical that we hold the media outlets accountable for how they present these stories. Oftentimes you see their, I'm going to say, zhuzhed up, oh, this happened and this happened and this happened. Okay, yeah, those things might have happened, but how do they influence the story? Are they pertaining to the crime that was committed in any way? If not, then they need to be left out. Sensationalism versus sensitivity. Unfortunately, some news outlets prioritize clicks and ratings over accuracy and empathy. This can lead to sensationalist headlines that distort the reality of sex crimes or reporting that fixates on irrelevant details about the victims, such as their clothing or their lifestyle. This not only misrepresents the crime, but it also can cause lasting harm to survivors and discourage others from coming forwards. Sensitivity in reporting isn't about avoiding the topic, it's about telling the truth without causing further damage. Ethical journalism centers around the story and its facts, not drama, and treats all parties with dignity. Sensitivity means focusing on truth, dignity, and context, and then ethical journalism supports awareness, justice, and healing. Overall, the media and the press needs to be offering support for these victims. Rather the people that were writing these articles feel that or not, it needs to be emphasized. Additionally, there needs to be no bias in these articles, in these news programs. That way these victims can have justice, and that way they can have a more, I'm going to say better experience, which sounds really bad, but there doesn't need to be a bias on either side. Offenders are often perceived as guilty, whether they are or not, and then victims are often blamed for the crime, different things like that. Those factors play a role. So here's a quote that I decided to include by Helen Benedict on the privacy rights of rape victims in 1993. She said, "At the moment, the accepted practice is for the media to investigate the life and personality of any woman who is the victim of a notorious sex crime. Why does the media assume a rape victim's life or personality is relevant to the crime?" So I chose to include this quote because I feel like it definitely ties into this topic. You often see or hear people saying, "Oh, she wore this, she wanted this to happen," or "He said this, he wanted this to happen." That isn't the case, and they also pull in personal lives, occupation. Something that comes to my mind is sex workers. They're often looked down upon for their occupation. However, just because they're doing that doesn't mean that they deserve to experience what happened to them. So this practice suggests that the victim's character somehow justifies or explains what happened to them, which is both misleading and harmful. Benedict's question challenges us and the media to rethink what is actually relevant in reporting on these crimes. Does all of this information pertain to the crime that was committed? In most cases, the answer is going to be no. Common media tropes focus on victims' appearance, clothing, or behavior, like we just said, highlighting occupation or lifestyle, especially if non-traditional. Speculation about relationship status or sexual history. Oh, they had this many partners, they had this many boyfriends, girlfriends. That doesn't matter. Subtle implication that the victim was asking for it. This is something that I feel like we typically see in the big cases. Oh, she said this, or she dressed this way, she did her makeup this way, she was asking for it. No, she wasn't. These tropes shift blame and distract from the crime itself. So by implying all of this about the victim, you're leaving out the offender and you're basically giving them an excuse to commit the crime. So building on Helen Benedict's critique, it's clear that certain patterns, what we might call media tropes, appear again and again in coverage of sex crimes. For example, many articles will describe what a victim was wearing, whether she was drinking or whether she worked in a field like entertainment or nightlife. While these details may seem like context, they often serve to subtly suggest that the victim's choices contributed to the crime. This not only undermines the legal and moral seriousness of the offense, but can also re-traumatize victims and set damaging societal norms about who deserves to be believed. Next, we're talking about the impact on victims. The way sex crimes are covered doesn't just inform the public, it also directly impacts survivors. When the media focuses on sensational details or casts doubt on the victim's credibility, it can be deeply traumatizing. Survivors may feel exposed, ashamed, or even blamed for what happened to them, as we so often see. This kind of coverage also can be discouraging to others that are coming forward. If someone sees a victim being scrutinized or humiliated in the news, they might decide that it's safer to stay silent, even at the cost of justice and healing. Ethical reporting is vital to ensure survivors feel supported and not further harmed. So, as we talked about, the re-traumatization, the silencing effect is the fear of being judged, which may stop victims from reporting. So, if they were the victim of a sex crime and they see how the news or the media is scrutinizing other victims, they're more likely not to come forward. Shame and isolation, negative portrayals, enforce stigma. So often happens. Survivors may feel invalidated or disbelieved. If people are being shamed for what happened to them, then they're most likely the other people that have had this experience aren't going to come forward and report it just because they feel like they're not going to be believed. And media framing can influence how others treat the victim. Next, we're going to talk about who is affected. Sex crimes don't just affect the individual victim. As we've talked about in this class, there are other types of victims. So their friends and family often experience emotional stress, guilt, or helplessness. Entire communities even can, especially when high-profile cases occur, feel shaken or divided. We see this in a lot of popular cases. Something that comes to my mind is the Menendez brothers case, just because there were sex crimes mentioned in their case, and then they also murdered their parents as well. And so you see the divide in the community for who believes them and who's against them. Media coverage plays a role in shaping all of their experiences, and it can validate a victim's suffering and spark public support. Or on the flip side, it can make things worse by spreading misinformation, shaming the victim, or vilifying someone who hasn't yet gone to trial. Survivors of other assaults are also watching, so if they see media coverage that's harsh or judgmental, they may feel like they are re-traumatized or less likely to be less likely to share their own stories. So direct victims are affected emotionally, psychologically, physically. Indirect victims include friends, families, support systems, communities. Communities have a sense of safety and trust that can be distributed. Offenders and the accused. Media bias can lead to public judgment before trial. So if they're found not guilty, then they have that shame over their head and they have that basically a target on their back because people do believe that they committed the crime. Survivors of similar crimes, media tone might trigger trauma or silence them. Next is